Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. We all know how tragic the Horizon IT story is. People lost livelihoods, people lost their freedoms, some people lost their lives. And even after it became apparent that the IT was indeed dodgy and questionable, the Scottish Government carried on prosecuting sub-postmasters simply because they couldn't be bothered not to. They didn't want to admit that they were wrong. They didn't want to admit that the previous prosecutions were unsafe. That would make them look stupid. And so they ploughed on and made more misery out of sheer ineptitude. Well, eventually they get bounced into having to issue this blanket exoneration. Not that they wanted to, of course. Dorothy Bain wanted, of course, to go through one at a time, sifting them individual, case by case. But, of course, the guilt, even for the SNP, became too much. And it was when Labour eventually said, right, we're going to do it. They jumped in and said, no, it'll be ours, we'll do it. We'll show people that we're the caring party. And yet everybody knows they were the ones prosecuting. In the UK as a whole, in England and Wales, it was, of course, the Post Office that did the prosecutions because they have that power. That power has subsequently been removed from them. But in Scotland, it was the Scottish Government because there is no independent judiciary. And so it was up to the Scottish Government to prosecute and thus to exonerate. But there are claims that the SNP are making political capital out of it. They're saying and pushing the narrative that they are the ones doing the right thing after the terrible inexactitudes of false justice. The false justice that they themselves pushed. Let's take a look. SNP accused of exploiting the Horizon scandal for political purposes, despite the tragic situation. And it was. I mean, some people actually took their own lives over this because they couldn't face what was going on. And this was prosecuted by the SNP government of Scotland. It's been there for 17 years. It is at the core heart of this problem. It produced the most prosecutions. It knew the software was dodgy and it's still prosecuted, because to do otherwise would have meant that all those previous prosecutions were wrong and the people must be released and they'd be seen to have made a mistake. And as we know, the SNP never ever make mistakes. The Scottish Government introduced its emergency Post Office Horizon scandal exoneration bill at Holyrood yesterday, with the SNP slapped down for its delay in doing so and blaming the UK Government for not legislating in Scotland. But the UK Government couldn't. The UK Government had its law there. It prosecutes via its courts. Scotland prosecutes via its courts. In the UK, it was prosecuted by the Post Office. In Scotland, it was prosecuted by the government. The SNP constantly say they don't want interference in government and they don't want interference in the court system of Scotland by the rest of the UK, so they can't have their cake and eat it. Also the fact that no one in England and Wales was prosecuted for embezzlement. And so the English and Wales bill did not exonerate embezzlement because nobody was prosecuted for it. And therefore, if it had been applied across, then all those postmasters for whom embezzlement was a charge would not have been exonerated. But you can't adjust the England and Wales bill to include embezzlement because nobody was charged for it, and you can't give a blanket ban on something, or a blanket exoneration on something that was never prosecuted. That's the law. So even if they'd overridden their own government non-interference rules for government, non-interference rules for judiciary, the UK court still, the England and Wales courts, still couldn't exonerate the people of Scotland because of the embezzlement charge. These people live in a world of their own, don't they? And there he is, Keith Brown. He's moaning, Westminster didn't do it for us. Westminster, meh. If Westminster had, you've had other people going, why are Westminster interfering in Scottish politics? Why are Westminster interfering in our unique court system? Can't lose. What he means is they wanted Westminster to do it so that they weren't seen as the ones that got it wrong. Let's be honest, Keith. Stop lying, you two-faced lying toad. Anyway, the SNP were accused of exploiting the Horizon Post Office scandal for political purposes, as a bill to exonerate all Scots victims was debated at Holyrood. They did the first reading yesterday, they're doing the second reading today, and then it's going to go off for the committee stage. It'll come back a couple of weeks, bang, it'll be there, but then it won't be implemented until after the UK does its compensation scheme. The fact it came about so belatedly provoked a cross-border constitutional row, was brought up in the chamber, with the SNP repeatedly claiming that Westminster should be legislating for Scotland. It's a strange situation to take, considering. And they said it should include Scotland in their bill. This was not done because of the huge differences in the justice systems north and south of the border. But in the explanatory notes which accompanies the Post Office Horizon System Offences Scotland Bill, take deep breath when you're reading that one, officials write that there are nuances which would not be included in the UK government's legislation, including different legal terms and crimes, including embezzlement, which is a Scotland-only crime. Actually, you can be done for embezzlement in English law. It's just in this case they didn't do embezzlement in English law. Scottish Tory MSP Murdo Fraser welcomed the law finally being introduced at Holyrood, but blasted SNP ministers for using the issue to stoke a constitutional row. Because every time they can create a little difference, it's bound to make people think, hey, we need to be separate. Look, we've got a constitutional row. We need to be an independent country. Actually, people are just fed up with it. And you can't keep blaming Westminster for everything you get wrong. Even your own supporters now are saying, will you shut up? Will you stop blaming Westminster? You got it wrong. Admit it. Don't be a dick. Can't help it. Whole party full of dicks. Imagine a field of dicks. And they go out cropping them and harvesting them. And they pick all these dicks up and then they put a suit on it, throw it into Holyrood. In an interview on the 23rd of April, the then First Minister, Humza Yousaf, said he was utterly furious about the fact that the UK government had chosen not to extend their legislation to Scotland. He said it was outrageous and unacceptable. Justice is devolved to this Parliament. What? So Humza Yousaf wanted the UK government at Westminster to legislate for Scotland, even though saying constantly, we are an independent country. Great, isn't it? What a knob. Anyway, the decisions made to take prosecutions in Scotland were not a matter for the Post Office. It was entirely a matter for the Crown Office and the Procurator Fiscal Service, i.e. the Scottish Government. And had the UK Government tried to introduce a bill to deal with Scottish justice matter, we can only imagine the very people to complain would have been SNP ministers. But then they try and turn the current situation into a constitutional grievance. Almost right on cue, SNP, MSP and former Justice Secretary Keith Kitchen-Brown ranted about how the scandal was completely the fault of the UK government. No, Keith. Do look at the facts before opening your stupid lying mouth. The Crown Office prosecuted the cases in Scotland, not the UK government. How can it be the UK government? How can it be Westminster? First of all, how can it be Westminster's fault when it was the Scottish government that prosecuted, that chose to prosecute, and that used its offices to prosecute? How can that be Westminster's fault? Your government did it. And secondly, it wasn't even Westminster, it wasn't the UK system, wasn't the UK justice system that prosecuted these people in England and Wales. It was the Post Office. Anyway, the Post Office, he said, is answerable to UK ministers and they're responsible for not taking action when the faults of the Horizon system were first identified. I'm going to say Private Eye, and I mentioned this before, Private Eye, we've been going on about this since about 2003. It's not a new thing. From almost the day it was introduced, Private Eye was saying there's faults. And they were watching all these postmasters, and they kept saying the faults are in the system. And they got software experts to go in and look, and they knew, I think in 2005, they found the faults, and they were still prosecuting all the way up. Anyway, he said it'd be a rare occasion that who was this? Keith Brown. You know what, I get on a sidetrack and I forget what I'm talking about. Keith Brown said it would be a rare occasion I would stand here and say, why does the UK not legislate in Scottish affairs? But on this occasion, given the necessity of speed and the necessity to mirror the UK legislation as closely as possible, why not ensure there's a parity of treatment for everyone across the UK affected by this? Because laws are different, legal systems are different, the charges are different, and the prosecuting system, i.e. Post Office and government, are different. You can't expect them to be the same, you idiot. Why does the UK government not include Scotland but does include Northern Ireland, which has a different legal system? Because in Northern Ireland they were prosecuted by the Post Office, you knob. Anyway, he goes, I can't make sense out of the UK government's decision. That's because, Keith, you're a moron. You can't make sense if someone handed you a pair of shoes while you're wearing a pair of shoes. You go, that's confusing. You've given me these, but I'm already wearing them. Honestly, Keith Brown couldn't pour piss out of a boot if the instructions on how to do so were written on the underside of the heel. Stage 2 of the bill set to go in front of MPs on Thursday. Sorry, I thought it would be today. Oh well, doesn't matter. But it will not be fully passed till after the UK government one does, due to the compensation scheme. Yeah, basically it goes up to the committee, they sign it all off, it comes back, but it doesn't go to assent until after the compensation scheme. Because the UK government are going to pay all the compensation. They're not even asking the Scottish government to pay the compensation. So old Brown needs to crawl back under whatever stone he's crawled out of and masturbate furiously over the fact that the UK government aren't legislating for Scotland. What an idiot. Anyway, coming up. Perhaps if Keith Brown spent less time doing a bit of whataboutery and spent more time understanding the rules of his own government and his own legal system, he would stop making a complete dick of himself on so often an occasion. And yet he won't. He seems to insist that on opening his mouth and pouring out sheer utter load of old rubbish that in his mind is clear, concise and accurate, and yet strangely never is. This is what happens, of course. You've got no talent, no education. They're all fools, and they all think that they're right all of the time, never wrong. Arrogance, hubris, conceit, stupidity. Thank you very much for watching. Do please hit the right button. Right button? Well, yeah, the right button is the subscribe button. I don't know where that came from. Do please hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, leave a like, leave a comment. Please share the video, and I will speak to you later. Bye.